welcome to our session on Korea. And we have a very distinguished panel for our Korean session. And I'll go from Dino, who's furthest away from me. Dino, of course, is the founder of the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, but it's worth reminding those of us who've forgotten that he's already played a very distinguished role in Indonesian foreign policy as ambassador to the United States for Indonesia on Korean Peninsula relations and Japanese-Sino relations and how that impacts upon Korean issues. Now, we're going to go in a slightly disguised order. Because of Dino's general responsibilities, he has to leave after his presentation. But we're going to go first with Professor Flake, then to Dino, and Dino will, as best Dino can, discreetly leave when he needs to, and then we'll go to Richard, and then to Professor R. So all of our contributors have 5 to 7 minutes, no leniency at all, even for Dino, and then I'll have a couple of questions for the panel, and then we'll open it up to our audience for questions and interaction. Gordon.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Dino, as well. This is the third opportunity I've had to attend this wonderful conference on Indonesian foreign policy, and it really is one of the highlights of my year. I wanted to start by extending my congratulations to the Foreign Policy Committee of Indonesia for a wonderful opening ceremony, the very inspirational efforts, and for recognizing some of the remarkable diplomacy that is taking place on the Korean Peninsula today. So that it's always moving to see former foes come together on the stage for the type of award that you prepared. Having said that, I'm going to try to give a little bit more of a regional perspective on these issues we've been dealing with today. I have been working on and about in the Korean Peninsula for over 30 years now. And during that time, I have seen some dramatic changes. None more dramatic than just in the last 12 months alone. Dino mentioned in the opening exercises there that we've gone from the cusp of war last year, with President Trump talking about fire and fury and power such as the world has never known, to what we saw on the stage this afternoon. But having said that, I, like most people, agree with the wisdom of Winston Churchill when he said that jaw is better than war. So talking is generally better than war. So I'm very happy about where we are today compared to where we were even at the end of January, when we were on the brink of a real conflict between the United States and North Korea, which could involve the whole region. Having said that, we have not yet accomplished peace. There are some really serious issues that remain to be resolved. This is not an accomplished deal. In fact, in many respects, the hardest issues all lie ahead of us. So there's an old Korean proverb that says, with one step, the journey is half done. It implies that you're beginning the process, and that's good. But let me, if I can, just take just a second and look at a little bit broader perspective, because when I first began working on this issue, the long-standing tensions between North and South Korea were really a Korean Peninsula issue. But today, the issues in North Korea are relevant to Indonesia, they're relevant to Australia, they're relevant globally. The Korean Peninsula is not a Korean Peninsula issue. It is a regional issue, it is a global issue. And the reason is because the issues that we're dealing with are all global in their implications. North Korea now has tested nuclear weapons. They're the only state in history to pull out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, and to test a nuclear weapon. They're the only state in history to have withdrawn from their obligations under the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. They have 6 different sets of UN Security Council sanctions resolutions against them, none of which have been addressed in that regard. So I'm happy we're moving towards peace, but all of these things have regional ramifications. So let me actually give you a little bit of a perspective from Australia. I've spent a good chunk of the last 5 years trying to convince people that Australia is interested in North Korea out of its own national interest, not just because they're an ally of the United States. And the way I would explain that is this. Australia is a relatively big country geographically, but a small country in terms of population. You know, the first conference that Dino did had about 2,000 people. This year, it's about 10,000 people. I expect in 10 years there will be 25 million people at Dino's conferences. And that is the population of Australia. There's only 25 million people. So Australia has to have a rather creative way of guaranteeing its national security. And it does it through two strategies. Of course, its own national military. But number one, relying upon an alliance relationship with the United States. But number two, relying upon the rules-based order. And this is an area where Indonesia and Australia have tremendous commonality. They both recognize that they need things like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Missile Technology Control Regime, the International Atomic Energy Accords, and all these things. The United Nations Security Council itself. So like Australia, Indonesia is also full-throated in its defense of multilateralism. But over the last 5 years, as North Korea has successfully tested an intercontinental ballistic missile, that fundamentally undermines Australia's national security. You know, when North Korea pulls out of the NPT, you know, Australia relies upon the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That impacts Australia's national security directly. All these things, when North Korea ignores and flaunts 6 different sets of UN Security Council resolutions, it undermines the UN Security Council and thus Australia, and I would say also Indonesia's national security. So these are issues that remain, and they're really, really big. Unfortunately, we're in a situation now where what happened in Singapore was beautiful, and it's symbolic, and it made for great reality television, but it didn't do anything to address those underlying issues. North Korea has not committed to abandon its nuclear weapons unilaterally. It hasn't committed to go back to the NPT. It hasn't committed to return to compliance with its agreement, the 6-party talks, or to rejoin the IAEA. All that it's done is committed to this vague idea of, you know, committed to denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula, and they're explicit. What that means is, you know, ending the U.S. alliance, removal of U.S. troops, removal of the U.S. nuclear umbrella, and ultimately mutual disarmament. And so if you put it in that context, you understand the situation becomes a lot more complex. I'll make just one more thing. I see my time is up, and I'll say one very brief comment on that. If you look at countries like Indonesia or nearby neighbors like Japan that are under direct threat, but right now what's happening is a direct threat to Japan, and those interests haven't been factored in yet. They weren't addressed at all in terms of Japan. So there was great optimism this morning, but that's needed because there's an awful lot of really difficult issues that yet are to be addressed. I'll stop there.
Well, thanks very much, Gordon. So, Patti, you led the ASEAN delegation to North Korea. We had glimpses of that this morning, so the floor is yours.
So FPCI, we conducted a mission to North Korea in February. April. Richard from Manila came, and a few more, Vietnam, Thai, Myanmar, and then one person from New Zealand. And that was a risky mission because, you know, the Panmunjom summit had not taken place yet at the time, and people were asking, you know, what are you doing there? And to be honest, you know, we didn't take a risk because if Panmunjom and all those things did not happen afterwards, I would look like a fool, right? Going there under those kind of conditions. But when we went there, a couple of things that I want to share with you. One is I found we have, they like us, the North Koreans, right? Everywhere we went, people talk about Bung Karno. Having gone to Pyongyang, they talk about the flower that he gave, and so on and so on. So there's some kind of historical kinship between that North Koreans feel towards Indonesia, and that was really felt everywhere we went. So that's one. Second thing is that I think the isolation really hurt them, right? In the North Korean eyes, there are 3 groups of countries. One is the hostiles, you know, the United States, Japan, South Korea, And then the second group was the socialist countries, right? Cuba, China, obviously, the biggest one, right? Vietnam, right? And so on. And then the third one is the Asian countries, right? Which includes Indonesia and ASEAN and so on. I think they were feeling by the time we got there that, okay, it's okay for the hostiles to be against us. They're supposed to be against us, the United States, Japan, and South Korea. But for us to be beginning to be marginalized by the socialist countries and the Asian countries, that was hard for them to take. And I think that was reflected in the conversations. And I think what they wanted to do was to see how they could get out of it, end this isolation, so to speak. The sanctions did hurt, of course. Right? When we were there, they placed us in the guest house, and there was kerupuk, yeah, right? Kerupuk, potato chips and so on, made in Indonesia, right? But the dates were all out of date, right? Jadi barang-barang nggak masuk, right? Goods were not coming in. Even the Coke, right, and the Sprite, they were all out of date. But they were all adamant when we were there, saying that the sanctions only emboldened us even more, that we're on the right path, and so on, right? But in my view, when I spoke with the diplomatic corps in Pyongyang, they did say that the sanctions hurt, but just the North Koreans, of course, would not admit it. The other point is that we found that Kim Jong-un has full ownership of the peace initiatives, right? What does it mean? It means it's a good thing, because if you have a peace process and Kim Jong-un feels this is not his peace process, it would not go anywhere. But if he feels that, look, I'm starting this is my initiative. It began with my New Year speech. And I'm the one who said I'm going to send a delegation to Pyeongchang for the Winter Olympics. I'm the one who says we're going to do this, we're going to meet in Panmunjom, and so on and so on. Then the peace process becomes more durable because of the ownership of it, right? So when we were there, we wrote a letter to Kim Jong-un, and we drafted it the whole night. We had a lot of debate, even the smallest comma, right, and everything, right? But basically the purpose of the letter was saying, look, you started this, you own this, and we want you to go even farther. Why is that important? Because the farther the process goes, the more all of us benefits from it. Right? And the other one is about China. I think I noticed before he did anything else, he made his January speech about what he wants to do, about the rapprochement. But before he made any move towards South Korea, towards US or anybody, what did he do? He went to Beijing. Right? He went to Beijing to meet with President Xi Jinping. It was not a state visit, it was party-to-party visit. And you can tell that whatever international strategy he wanted to do, the first most important thing was to get China back. Because China had been hard on North Korea before, right? Because of the missile tests and so on and so on. So Kim Jong-un wants to show China and wants to show the world and the region that whatever I do, China is going to be the first move and the first the first factor I have to embrace in my next strategic calculations. So the China factor is very important here. And the final point, I know time's up. I agree with Gordon that we have verbal commitments, but reunification and denuclearization, I think, would be much more complicated, will take a long time. When we asked everybody about reunification, the North Koreans said, yes, we love it. These are our brothers and sisters and so on. But when we asked them, what's the next step? nobody can give an answer. You know, opening a corridor, a tourist, or whatever. You know, right now, if you want to go to Pyongyang, you can't get there from Seoul. You got to go to China and take a plane there, right? So, what would be the next step for reunification? Not a single answer. And I think the same thing for denuclearization. When you ask them, what is the next step? What is the first step? You're going to get a very elusive answer. So I'm afraid Gordon and I agree with this. Verbally, the commitment is there, the political commitment is on paper, right? But when it comes to realizing it, what are the next steps concretely, I don't think we're going to get a clear answer anytime soon.
Thanks, Dino. And Dino will take his leave when he needs to. So, Richard, your impressions of your visit to North Korea and your contribution.
Thanks, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you again for inviting me, Dino. This is a very special place for many reasons, as you may know. I'm not really sure why I'm invited here because I'm not really a kind of a North Korea expert, and there are a lot of colleagues, female younger colleagues like Chiping, that I hope will be invited next year here. I'm also glad there's a little bit more gender balance. I hope there'll be more gender balance in our discussions. Well, actually, my familiarity with the North Korean issue comes in the context of my understanding of the Iranian nuclear negotiations. And I kind of find it weird that for a country like Iran that has not yet developed nuclear weapons per se and really followed the book on the negotiating process, suddenly now they are in a position of isolation. So Trump withdraws from that deal, which is in many ways binding. And then suddenly now Trump is seen as some sort of a purveyor of peace because he's dealing with North Korea. So I find it kind of weird, right? And that was where my initial pessimism and skepticism comes in. But thanks to Dino, I mean, we went to North Korea and that was an interesting discussion. The thing is this, I mean, I'm not fan of Trump, right? I already have a version of Trump back in Manila, right? There are lots of more Trumps coming forward, including in Brazil soon. But as the Romans said, if you want peace, you have to prepare for war. And if you read the book by Bob Woodward, Fear, there are many different biographies, autobiographies, biographies on Trump, but I think this one is good because it analyzes how the situation was actually desperate in 2017. When it became very clear to the intelligence community that North Korea was on the verge of developing capability to place continental America within the range of its nuclear weapons, right? That was a wake-up call. And the reality is, and this is what Obama discovered towards the end of his administration, is that there are no easy options. First, option of war. It might take millions of American troops constantly occupying North Korea, assuming they take out everything, and then it's going to be a nightmare, right? So total war is not an option. Then they thought about limited war, for instance, just surgical strikes. But the problem is that that could escalate into total war because in nuclear game theory, there's something called use it or lose it, right? So if your country like North Korea only has few weapons and you're facing an America with thousands of nuclear weapons, the moment that you think America is about to attack you, you might as well use whatever nuclear weapons you got, right? Before you lose it all, right? So that option is also out of the table. The third option, which is what now we're facing and coming to terms with, is living with a nuclear North Korea. And this is, I think, very difficult for anyone who's in position of power. And I think Trump, to be fair to him, is facing a difficult position. And we know that this is not about Trump per se, but this is also about the Trump administration. And there are many hawks inside that Trump administration who are not fools, right? Bolton, Pompeo, among other things. But I think to understand what's happening in North Korea, it's a three-dimensional, essentially, chess game. Going to the North Korea, the first aspect is my understanding of North Korea, and you get many interesting discussions with North Koreans after long karaoke talks, right? And a lot of things that happen during karaoke talks. I remember one of the North Korean officials I was talking to. So first I asked him, I'm very familiar, I've been to a lot of authoritarian countries, so I know how it works, the party line. I asked, like, what do you think about Americans? And the first line was, oh, they're all the same, they're all imperialist, President Globe. And I pushed it a little bit further. I said, well, Carter was not too bad, right? He visited North Korea 5 times, he pushed for humanitarian efforts. But I said, Carter was not incumbent anymore. What about the incumbent ones? And then they said, they told me something very interesting. They said, one of the guys said, with some presidents, you can take your time, but with some presidents, you have to make a decision very quickly, right? In my sense, that was Obama versus Trump, right? And this is where also my understanding of North Korea comes in. North Korea has a sense of urgency because the economic sanctions are biting, but it also has a sense of confidence. You know, psychology is a complex thing, right? So you have a simultaneous sense of urgency because the economy is really getting hurt, and Kim Jong-un wants to modernize the country. He humiliatingly sees how South Korea is far away from them, or China, among other things. But at the same time, they feel that finally they can negotiate from a position of strength, right? Remember the term they use, we're a full strategic state, which I think is a bureaucratic Stalinist speak for we're a full-scale nuclear weapon state right now, right? So they feel that they can finally negotiate from somehow a position of strength, and perhaps Trump is the guy they can make the deal with, right? Or at least, as the Chinese proverb goes, the first step in the journey of 1,000 miles. The second thing we have to keep in mind is the aspect of South Korea. In fact, the reason why I'm supporting the peace process is not about Trump or Kim Jong-un, it's actually because of Moon Jae-in. In Filipino, we have expression called suntok sa buwan, means punch in the moon, means foolishness, right? But in the case of Moon Jae-in, I don't think this is a suntok sa buwan, because if you know about Moon Jae-in, his parents were from North Korea. He was a product of that war, pushed as a refugee to Busan. He was a special forces member in the 1970s when America and North Korea almost went to war over that tree that was cut down in the demilitarized zone, which was supposedly planted by Kim Il-sung. He was part of special forces. He was a human rights lawyer. He studied the Sunshine Policy very carefully. He was chief of staff of President Ri. This is a person who intimately, emotionally, and cognitively understands the complexity of issues, and yet Moon Jae-in is staking his entire political capital on this peace process. He must know something, and I'm giving benefit of doubt to that. And the last option, the last phase is US-China competition. What I like about Trump is he's not playing by the Chinese playbook. The Chinese playbook is, I help you on North Korea, you be nice to me on Taiwan and South China Sea or trade. Guess what? Trump is not good on any of those fronts. And that's where I'm kind of pro-Trump in a closet way. So I'll just give it to you.
Today that ambassadors from North Korea, DPRK, South Korea, RK, received courage for peace award, right? I was about to say Nobel Peace Prize, but not yet. And then, yes, said, this is what I prepared, okay? In order to help you to understand what's happening in Korea, it covers like 50 slides. So this is what I've got. The Korean Peninsula Normalization, Denuclearization, and Reunification. Where I have to do. Hello? Okay. Let's go. This is, sorry. I think this is what you know between Kim Jong-un and so what I was asked was concentrate on Moon Jae-in administration's policy for North Korea, so I'll just be focused on this is establishing peace regime between Moon Jae-in, President Jae-in, and they say His Excellency, but I'm glitter. All right. And what was asked was complete denuclearization, right? At first they said CVID, complete verifiable. They were just called denuclearization. But recently we just say complete denuclearization, so we'll find out what it means. And then, of course, what our government, the U.S. took provided security guarantee in exchange for the following through with denuclearization. That's what was said. And then North Korea strengthening its partnership with China and Russia. And also here you can see what does that mean for denuclearization, bombs and missiles. right? And here, nuclear explosion, it is said that North Korea would have nuclear weapons 25 to 60 nuclear weapons. That's what our Minister of Reunification put it officially. No country in the world recognizes North Korea as a nuclear state, but it's already de facto nuclear state. As you can see there, 60 nuclear weapons. And then it is known that mostly we only know Yongbyon nuclear site, but Gangshan has enrichment plants. It's said in the Washington Post and then Diplomat. So we have discussed the Trump model as well here. And North Korea wants guarantee of regional security. Right? This is all what we can say. It says CVIG. G is regional guarantee, while we are talking about CVID. Right? And then, and this is U.S. forces in Korea. We're not going anywhere. It's not even a subject of discussions. This is what the U.S. put it. And then it is also, North Korea is a significant threat so far. And I think we already discussed the U.S.-China trade war pass. And here, it's not smooth, but confident of Moon Jae-in. Here, what he's talking about is they do not keep the promise. If they do not keep the promise, they will have to face the judgment of the international community. I think, as you know, the Moon Jae-in administration put more emphasis on the release of economic sanctions against North Korea, while the United States and even countries in Europe, they put more emphasis on keep CVID, right? Maximum pressure on North Korea. We can find some gaps between our steps, right? So that's the economy first policy of North Korea. I think you can see the Inter-Korean Summit, and they raised hands and went to Mountain, right? It really gives the scene that peace, like this is for peace award, this prize, and depending on the United States corresponding measures, that's what President Moon Jae-in did. While Donald Trump agreed to allow nuclear inspections subject to final negotiations and to permanently dismantle a test site, a launching pad. But still, I think we can see the gap between these postures. A joint development of this area, this is what we're going to do, our administration would do after denuclearization, or in the process of denuclearization, okay? And I think you can see, well, they put it here. The time is up. A few days ago, our President Moon Jae-in delivered a message of Kim Jong-un that North Korea would like to invite Pope to North Korea, where it is known that no freedom of religion. If it comes true in next year, I think it will really contribute for peace building there in the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
The two ambassadors, there's a lot of optimism, there's a lot of good feeling that, as Gordon put it, we've gone from talk of war, a very short period of time ago, to now what we describe as George, also optimism. But as Gordon also said, it's much more complex, and as Dino said, no one quite knows what the next step is. As soon as you unpack some of this, we've got some dichotomies. Historically, when you looked at the Korean Peninsula, everyone thought that nothing would occur without China or US permission, whereas we see the two respective presidents of North and South Korea potentially freewheeling, trying to make progress themselves. You've got those people who are expert in the Korean Peninsula sometimes aghast at what has occurred, but amateurs looking in, thinking progress is being made. You've got President of the United States, Donald Trump, saying on a regular basis that sanctions need to not only be enforced but to be enhanced. And at the same time, we've got South Korean President Moon going around Europe saying it'll actually help if sanctions on North Korea are lifted. So we've got some dichotomies here, and it's very complex. And to our learned panelists, what is the next step? Is this a matter which South and North Korea can progress by themselves, conferring from time to time with China and the US? Is there any role for a regional initiative, given that this does impact upon the region, as Gordon pointed out? Or are we just going to allow two freewheeling presidents of North and South Korea to see if they can make an historic breakthrough that might last? So, Dino, you're still here, so...
Let's go and take that very difficult question.
One of the phrases that you will hear very frequently from Australian diplomats and political leaders is rules-based order. Rules-based order. And the truth is, this is something that we actually hear a lot from Indonesia as well. Lately, if you think about Dino's introduction, all over the world, the rules, the laws, the standards, the norms of international relations are crumbling. And those include those on security. Right? And so, just like the United States and Japan heroically worked together to put back together the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, now called the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the TPP, CPTPP, and Indonesia is interested. That's good because multilaterally, in the face of Chinese opposition and in the face of US opposition, middle powers or countries in the region say, no, we need to hold together. My view is that that's exactly what needs to happen when you talk about security as well. You know, even if Kim Jong-un did everything he promised to Donald Trump, it would not put North Korea back in the NPT. It wouldn't address Japan's national security interests or, candidly, Indonesia's or Australia. So I think countries like Indonesia and Australia and the UK and Canada and France all need to work together to strengthen international laws and rules and norms when it comes to security. Because the truth is, even after the summit, North Korea is continuing to develop nuclear weapons and they're continuing to develop long-range missiles. And so the problem, even though Donald Trump said, I solved it, I'm done, it's not over, right? And so my view is that our country should work together to strengthen the rules and the system because it's going to be challenged in the future.
I think Kim Jong-un enjoys the position that he's in now. He has the upper hand and he got what he wanted, which is equality in relation to the United States, which is what happened when you sit next to the President of the United States in bilateral summits. So I think this is the path that he has set and the path that he will try to optimize as much as possible for his own gain. I think the North-South relations will be stronger than the North-US relations. Right? Again, we've seen Mike Pompeo visiting North Korea, and that part of the process remains. But I think the North-South relations will evolve in a much more substantive way than the DPRK-US relations. You think so? Yeah. And again, just before I leave, I just want to say that there was one scene that happened in North Korea during our visit that I will never forget all my life. And Richard is already getting nervous about this. We were there for 4 or 5 days and getting a lot of ideological conversations and talk about the strategic issues, Juche, and so on and so on. And the North Koreans were very hard, when talking about these things. But at the last day, they took us to a private restaurant, and we found me, the whole delegation, Richard included, and 10 North Korean officials dancing to Backstreet Boys. Yeah, so I thought that's the highlight of my career. I'm like, did this really happen? And obviously, Richard is a good dancer, right? In our team. But the North Koreans, I was quite surprised. They're quite good dancers as well, right? So, but I thought that was something I would never expect in my diplomatic career.
I think dancing was so good that we were worried that would keep us there, right? Well, I mean, there's a scene where Ben Affleck in Argus said it's so crazy it might work, right? And sometimes, a part of me says maybe this is the way to work it. I mean, maybe you need a Trump to deal with someone like Kim Jong-un, right? But of course there is. I mean, the positive thing I think here is, and when I was in South Korea last year, one of the persistent things I heard from the South Korean side is we should not allow the big boys to decide our fate. So the notion of agency for smaller countries, that was very important to the South Koreans. And I think that is one of the things that President Moon Jae-in is saying, that we should not wait for the permission of the Americans or the Chinese for us to decide the fate and destiny of the Korean people, right? I think that was a very powerful message, and that stopped me, and perhaps made me a little bit sentimental about this issue, perhaps a bit too much. On the part of North Koreans, I completely agree with Dino that if you look at it, Kim Jong-un doesn't seem to be taking orders from China. In fact, a part of me is saying, like, how relevant is still China, right? I mean, in the picture, like, how much leverage does Xi Jinping really have on Kim Jong-un when Kim Jong is kind of like playing everyone against each other, right? The problem, though, is at the end of the day, the configuration of power will still demand the consent of China and the United States in a final political settlement, right? Because the Civil War would not have been so destructive if not for entry of China, right? In 1952 or 51 in the Korean War. And you need still the consent of those two countries. Which brings us to the second level. Yes, sometimes it's so crazy it might work, but sometimes it's too crazy, it will no longer work. And I think this is where President Trump is problematic, right? Because President Trump has framed the situation in a way that either you're going to get one big bang settlement within a short period of time, or it's not going to work, because the problem with Donald Trump is that he's alienating all allies. And my worry is by next year, you're going to see a divide between South Korea and US in an all-out manner. I think the Moon Jae-in administration made it clear that by next year, May, they may start to unilaterally withdraw sanctions from North Korea. Russians and China are on board. What's going to happen and how US is going to respond to that, right? And this is where we're going to see the cost of how Trump's transactionalism, unilateralism, America alone approach is going to undermine this thing. So my fear is that Trump created a space for one-time, big-time, short-term, big deal. But as time goes by, actually, all of this kind of Trump style of art of the deal is going to show also why this is not sustainable. That's the worry I have down the road. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, but still I worry about next year. Because then I would like to ask you, more than 80% of Americans would consider that as long as Kim Jong-un is there, it is not likely that Kim Jong-un is going to abandon nuclear weapons, as well as what he prepared for quite a long time. If that happens, okay, then that means as long as Kim Jong-un is there, that means only the way to remove that kind of the possibility is to eliminate Kim Jong-un from the position, from the power. So is it likely, I'm not talking about surgical strike, but the attempt to eliminate Kim Jong-un? Oh, I think that's what I would like to ask you. And then what you pointed out is in 1953, we had Armistice Agreement, which was signed by North Korea and the United States. The US by that time was the representative of 16 UN nations, not just the US itself. that's why this is the background for North Korea. Always argue that peace treaty should be signed between the United States and North Korea only. But now we are talking about ending of war, declaration of ending of war. But the United States, well, they suggest if North Korea does not provide lists of nuclear weapons, up to 60 nuclear weapons and nuclear materials and so forth, then it is not likely that the United States would join declaration of ending of war. So also what I would like to point out was we have May 24th measure. In 1910, in the year 2010, we had the sinking of Cheonam ship, the naval force, and the 46 naval the soldiers had died. And then Myanmar administration prohibited all kind of exchanges between North and South Korea in May 24th. So far, it continues, and some part of it overlaps with UN sanction measure. But for example, Professor Moon Jung-in from Yonsei University, he says it's kind of sovereignty measure. So if a South Korean government wants to lift May 24th measure, it is not necessary to have approval from the United States. So that's what you can see kind of cleavages between the United States. So, but still, what I would like to ask you is, if we witness that kind of situation next year, do you see any kind of possibility of using military option of the United States? Not for such a strike only, but just try to eliminate the leader who wants to have nuclear weapons as well as ICBM. Okay.
Gordon, Richard, in response to
it's a question. I think there was a very interesting issue on the Atlantic, which looked at the option of, let's just call it the interview option, right? Political assassination. The problem with that, though, is two things. What if the attempt fails, right? Which is because it's very hard to get intel, right, about the exact position of Kim Jong-un and other thing. But the other thing is that he might be replaced by the devil we don't know, right? And that sometimes is even scarier. In fact, that was exactly the dilemma of the Obama administration on al-Baghdadi of ISIS. That there were many instances where they could have eliminated the guy. All they needed to do is to talk more to the Iranians and Russians, but better intel. But the idea was that he could have been replaced by even a crazier guy, right? So this is the other thing that we have to keep in mind. There is a risk. But I know that President Moon Jae-in actually last year cleared preparation for political decapitation, which at least doesn't show that they're preparing for all contingency. That at least is a good thing for me.
The reason why I'm asking is last year, the Henry Kissinger proposed kind of big deal to eliminate Kim Jong-un regime, change Kim Jong-un regime, not the collapse of the North Korean system, while the United States was compromised by the withdrawal of American troops from the Korean Peninsula. So far, that's what I'm worried about.
Okay, all right, now let's throw it open to questions from the floor. So we've got a bit of time for questions. I've got one at the back here, and then I'll go down the front, and then one at the back if we've got time. So over here first.
My name is Sultan Muhammad Fadil. I'm from Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta University. I would like to ask, in international relations study, we not just see from one perspective, we have diversity perspective. What I want to ask, what is happening in the great international relation theater with the play named Korean Reunification? Because I think North Korea, if they want to win the American or the US support, they don't have to reunification to South Korea. They can just like the end of the Aladdin, the dictator movie, where Aladdin become democracy, but they're like the democracy in the Suharto regime. Then I asked why South Korea want to reunification? Because I see people in South Korea, they are more advanced. They are, because their freedom makes them more moderate. It means that even when they are reunification with the North Korean people, it will make a relative gain. It means that why? I want to know behind the stage of this international relation change. That's all for me. Thank you.
For my entire life and my entire professional career, Koreans on both sides have professed a deep desire for unification. Over the last 20 years, particularly since the cost of the German experience has become clear, South Koreans want unification in principle, but gradual integration because the costs are too high. North Koreans, for their part, have watched what happened to East Germany, and they don't want that either. So the truth is, the number one obstacle to Korean unification today is the Koreans, to be blunt. North Koreans don't want to be absolved, South Koreans don't want to pay the price. So it really is, as much as I said earlier, the nuclear issue, the missile issue, is much broader than the Korean Peninsula. Unification is a peninsular issue, you know, and there is a hard path to get there. And the fundamental question is, how do you get there, absent one regime or the other giving up, right? And that it becomes really, really difficult. And behind the scenes, I see no evidence. Now, I will add one final thing here. If I'm thinking through the perspective of Moon Jae-in, he's got three objectives. One is very political. His own popularity drops because the economy is not doing well. If he doesn't make progress with North Korea, he's in trouble. So that's his political mandate, right? The second thing is he's genuinely concerned that if he doesn't make progress, there will be a war, that Donald Trump will start a war. So he has to stop war. But third is probably least understood. Moon Jae-in feels that if he does not make progress in North Korea, then China will. And then there will never be unification because China will just take over North Korea. So those three things drive him, even though there's concern about proliferation, alliances, all the issues we discussed.
Thank you, Gordon. Anyone else want to add to that? Professor Arnold?
Thank you. Especially in the 20s, for example, the teenagers, they would think that North Korea, one of the poorest countries in the world, would be burdensome economically. So I think if we put it, the will for reunification of Korean people is strong enough to go for, it's a step toward the improvement of relations between North and South Korea. But the thing in reality is how to manage DMZ, demilitarized zone, efficiently could be very important issue in the process of reunification. Because in North Korea, we have reciprocally, we have advantage for North Korea. North Korea has low-wage laborers, skilled low-wage laborers, plus plenty of resources. While in South Korea, we have capital and technology, right? In order to have reciprocal or complementary relationship for both North and South Korea, as well to keep a demilitarized zone, not as the German did, but I think that is the way we improve self-reliance of North Korean economy and then reduce unification costs in the future.
Thank you. So one down here in the front.
So thank you very much for the insightful information, especially Professor Gordon, because I thought that we were so much hypnotized with the idea of that peaceful process of having those talks, but we don't really think about the next effective step to solve the eventual problem. I want to ask about the denuclearization, and what are your thoughts about possibly resuming the six-party talks with the current political conditions with Trump, Shinzo Abe, and also Xi Jinping, with the current situations now? Because we know the reasons why it failed in the past, but with this first step of normalizing the conditions, is this the other step? Is this possibilities to resume the six parties talks in the near future for Trump, or was it? Thank you.
So, Richard?
Okay. Again, the closest model I could look at is the Iranian issue, right? What
allowed the Obama administration to deal with the Iranian issue was to accept implicitly that Iran will always have the enrichment capability. Once they accepted that, then negotiation became possible around those perimeters. In the case of North Korea, I think we have to realistically accept that they're going to remain as a nuclear weapon state for the foreseeable future. That's the only leverage they got. Why would they give it up, right? And hearing behind the scenes that Trump was calling for assassination of Bashar al-Assad, right? And that's not going to reassure you very much, right? Again, if you read the book, you're going to say, why not just kill the guy? When you saw the chemical attacks. What we can nonetheless get from North Korea in the coming years is at least a stop to provocative missiles tests, a certain transparency regime, and also some sort of a seizure to further enrichment, weapons-grade enrichment. Now, the other thing that helped in the Iranian negotiation was the role of third party. For instance, in the case of Iran, Russia acted as a third party that took out some of the highly enriched uranium out of Iran. Because the Iranians didn't want to give it up to the Europeans, right? But the Russians came in and Russians assured the Iranians, if things fall apart, we can give you back. That's why I can see the role for Russia or China, whereby they may take out some of the plutonium or enrich uranium from North Korea as some sort of confidence. So we're looking at essentially at confidence building measures on steroids for the foreseeable future. But that's one track. On the second track, which goes to the previous question, the strategy of the Moon Jae-in administration is functional integration. Infrastructure build-up, economic interdependence, and the hope is at some point, CBMs on the security front, functional integration on the economic front will create the right conditions 10, 15 years from now for actually Reunification, or actually denuclearization. But we're looking at a half a generation at least away. That is something we have to be realistic about.
So I know our time's up, so I'll be really short. The fundamental tension, the fundamental challenge we have right now is this. How do we make progress with North Korea while at the same time not undermining the international rules, the NPT, alliances, and alliance relationships? Because if North Korea was in a vacuum, we could be very creative with our timing or sequencing, six-party talks, whatever. We could do denuclearization at the very end. The problem is the more we give to North Korea, the more it undermines Japan's security, the more it undermines the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, etc. So that is the fundamental challenge. How do we make progress on one front when the progress required undermines other issues that are of concern to us?
Very good.
On six-party talks. Now, on six-party talks, I would like to suggest to extend six-party foreign ministers talks. Because so far, China wants to play a constructive role, so-called, and just, well, held in China. But if we extend up to foreign ministers party, then if we can have the six-party talks in China, and we can meet Xi Jinping, they can meet Xi Jinping, and then why not in North Korea? And why not in the United States? And they can have meeting with Mr. Trump or Kim Jong-un as well, and our president in South Korea as well. That's why, as long as six-party talks were held, that no nuclear tests, then they can discuss about territorial disputes plus climate change. So I think, why don't we suggest to extend six-party foreign ministers' security talks in the region? That's what I think. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Professor. I'm under strict instructions. And you've responded spontaneously by thanking our panel, Professor Gordon Flake, Professor Richard Heydarian, and Professor So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We've seen optimism this morning overlaid with complexity and challenges about the next step forward. So thanks very much to our panel, and please make your way quietly to your next session.
Thank you.